The glass walls of the executive boardroom on the 17th floor of the St. Jude Medical Tower looked out over the skyline of Chicago. Outside, a late October sleet was beginning to paint the streets in gray ice. Inside, the air was warm, smelling of fresh coffee, expensive leather, and the quiet, heavy tension of a multi-million-dollar transaction. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, my fingers lightly resting on the blue folder in front of me. At 34, as the newly appointed Chief Medical Officer of the St. Jude Medical Group, I had spent the last 3 years restructuring the hospital's clinical operations. And today, we were reviewing the buyout proposal for Sharma Medical Associates, a failing private surgical clinic in the suburbs. The door clicked open. My father, Dr. Ramesh Sharma, walked in first. Even at 60, he carried himself with the rigid, untouchable arrogance of a man who had spent 30 years being called chief by everyone he met. Behind him was my older brother, Dr. Rohan Sharma, 37, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a gold Rolex that caught the LED lights of the boardroom. Neither of them looked at me. To them, I was just the administrative representative sitting at the end of the table. They hadn't seen my face in 10 years. My father adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, sat down, and slid his portfolio across the table. "We are here to finalize the acquisition," Ramesh said, his voice carrying that familiar, booming authority that used to make me shrink into the floorboards as a child. Sharma Medical Associates has been the premier private clinic in the north suburbs for 20 years. Our valuation of $4.5 million is non-negotiable. We expect the board's full approval today. I slowly opened the blue folder. Inside lay a copy of a letter my father had hand-delivered to my apartment in Boston 10 years ago. The paper was yellowed, but the ink was still sharp. "You have chosen a path of academic vanity over family duty, Maya. You are the family failure. Do not call yourself a Sharma, and do not expect a single dime of support from this family again." I looked up, meeting my father's eyes for the first time in a decade. "Dr. Ramesh Sharma," I said, my voice completely calm, echoing in the quiet room. 10 years ago, you told me I was the family failure. Today, your clinic is $2.8 million in debt, facing 3 active malpractice lawsuits, and begging this board for a bailout. Before we discuss your valuation, let's talk about your receipts. Before we dive into the rest of this story, if you are new to the channel, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps more than you know to keep these stories going. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're listening from. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to where this all began. To understand the arrogance of my father and the blindness of my brother, you have to understand the family I was born into. In the Indian American community of Lake Forest, Illinois, my father was a legend. He was a pioneer in private vascular surgery, a man who had built a massive private practice that catered to the wealthiest families in the state. Our house was a sprawling 5-bedroom brick mansion with a 3-car garage and a manicured lawn that looked like a golf course. But inside, the house was a hierarchy. At the top of the pyramid was Rohan. Rohan was my older brother by 3 years. From the day he was born, he was designated as the heir to the Sharma medical dynasty. He was handsome, charismatic, and possessed a smooth, easy charm that hid his lack of discipline. When Rohan got a B- on a biology test in high school, my father would laugh and say, "Rohan is a big-picture thinker. He doesn't need to sweat the details." The hands of a surgeon are born, not trained. I was the scapegoat. I was the quiet daughter who spent her weekends in the library, whose nose was always in a textbook. I didn't have Rohan's easy charm, but I had a relentless, obsessive work ethic. When I scored a 99% on my chemistry finals, my father would look at the report card, frown, and say, "Maya, why did you miss that 1%? If you cannot pay attention to the small things, how will you ever manage a patient?" My mother, Geeta, was a gentle woman, but she was entirely under my father's thumb. She spent her days organizing charity galas and ensuring the house ran exactly to my father's specifications. When I cried in my room after being compared to Rohan, she would sit on the edge of my bed and whisper, "Maya, Beta, your father just wants the best for you. In our family, the son must carry the name. It is just the way things are. Do not make trouble." I tried. For 22 years, I tried to be the perfect daughter. I went to Northwestern University, completed my pre-med in 3 years, and got accepted into Harvard Medical School. I thought that would finally be the key. Surely, graduating from Harvard would make my father look at me the way he looked at Rohan, who had gone to a mid-tier Caribbean medical school after failing to get into a US program. But the goalposts always moved. When Rohan graduated from his Caribbean school, my father threw a massive banquet at the Ritz-Carlton in Chicago. He bought Rohan a brand new Mercedes-Benz E-Class and announced to 200 guests that Rohan was joining Sharma Medical Associates as a junior partner. When I graduated from Harvard Medical School, match day arrived. I matched into a highly competitive, double-board residency in cardiothoracic surgery and clinical research at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. It was an elite program, accepting only 2 residents a year. My parents didn't come to my graduation. They sent a text message, "Congratulations, Maya. We are very busy with the clinic's new wing opening this weekend. Let us know when you settle in Boston." I stood in the Harvard yard, surrounded by families taking photos, hugging, and celebrating. The Boston spring air was crisp, smelling of wet brick and cherry blossoms. I held my diploma folder in my hands, my chest feeling so hollow it physically ached. 2 months later, during my first year of residency, my father drove to Boston. He didn't come to see my apartment or ask how my 80-hour workweeks were going. He met me at a diner near the hospital, ordering black coffee and sitting across from me with a folder of legal documents. "I have prepared the paperwork," my father said, sliding a contract toward me. "Rohan is expanding the clinic. We are opening a second location in Naperville. I want you to finish your residency, skip the research fellowship, and return to Chicago. You will join the clinic as a junior staff surgeon. You will work under Rohan." I looked at the contract. The terms were clear. I would be an employee of my brother's corporation. My research on microvascular anastomosis, the work I was passionate about, which could help prevent graft failures in heart bypass patients, would have to be abandoned. "Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I can't sign this. I've been offered a 3-year research fellowship at the National Institutes of Health after my residency. Dr. Vance, the chief of surgery here, thinks my research could change the way we do coronary bypasses. I want to build something that helps patients on a larger scale." My father's face went dark. The coffee cup clattered against the saucer as he set it down. "Research," he spat, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous tone he used when his authority was questioned. "You want to spend 3 years playing with mice and writing papers that nobody reads for a $50,000 stipend? While your brother is building a real practice, making $500,000 a year. It's not about the money, Dad," I said. "It's about the medicine. Rohan's clinic does cosmetic vein removals and elective surgeries for wealthy clients. I want to do complex cardiothoracic surgery. I want to save lives." My father leaned forward, his eyes burning with a cold fury. "Let me tell you something, Maya," he said, each word hitting me like a physical blow. "You have always been selfish. Always trying to prove you are smarter than Rohan, always trying to show off. But you are nothing without this family. If you do not sign this contract and return to Chicago to support your brother, you are finished. You will not receive a single cent of inheritance. You will not be welcome in my house. You will be a family failure, begging for research grants while your brother runs a medical empire." My hands were shaking under the table. My stomach felt sick, a heavy, cold dread settling deep in my chest. I looked at my father, the man whose approval I had spent my entire life chasing, and I realized something. He didn't want me to be a successful doctor. He wanted me to be a foot soldier in Rohan's shadow. "I won't sign it, Dad," I said. My father stood up. He didn't say goodbye. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the letter he had already written, and dropped it onto the table next to my untouched sandwich. "Then you are on your own," he said. He walked out of the diner, the bell above the door jingling in the quiet afternoon. I sat there for 30 minutes, staring at the yellow legal paper. The final lines were burned into my memory. "You are the family failure. Do not call yourself a Sharma, and do not expect a single dime of support from this family again." That night, I went back to my tiny, one-bedroom apartment in East Boston. The walls were thin, and I could hear the rumbling of the Blue Line train passing nearby. I packed the few photos I had of my parents and Rohan into a cardboard box and pushed it to the back of the closet. I took the yellow letter, folded it into a tight, neat square, and slipped it into the zippered compartment of my leather stethoscope case. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. The next morning, I walked into the cardiothoracic ICU at Massachusetts General Hospital at 4:30 a.m. My chest was tight, my eyes burning from exhaustion, but when I put my stethoscope to a patient's chest and listened to the steady, rhythmic thump of a healing heart, the pain faded. I was Dr. Maya Sharma. I had $84 in my wallet, a mountain of student debt, and no family left. But I had my hands, my mind, and a fire in my chest that my father's coldness had only managed to fan into a blaze. The next 5 years were a lesson in survival. Boston in the winter is unforgiving. The wind off the Charles River cuts through your coat like a scalpel, and during my second and third years of residency, I lived in a state of perpetual gray exhaustion. My day started at 4 a.m. and rarely ended before 8 p.m. I lived on dry bagels, hospital cafeteria coffee, and the quiet, steady rhythm of the operating room. My mentor, Dr. Alice Vance, a legendary cardiothoracic surgeon who was 64, stood barely 5 feet tall, and had eyes like a hawk, became my anchor. She was the first woman to lead the department at Mass General, and she was a force of nature. Dr. Sharma, she told me one night in the scrub room, after we had spent 6 hours repairing a ruptured thoracic aorta on a 42-year-old mother of 3. Your technique is precise, but you are playing defense. You scrub in like you are apologizing for taking up space in my theater. Stop it. You have the best hands of any resident I've trained in a decade. Act like it. Under her guidance, I didn't just survive, I excelled. I completed my residency and went straight into my research fellowship. My research was focused on creating a biosynthetic polymer coating for vascular grafts. In bypass surgeries, a patient's own vein or a synthetic tube is used to redirect blood flow around a blocked artery. But synthetic grafts often fail because the body's immune system attacks them, causing blood clots. My polymer mimicked the natural lining of human blood vessels, preventing clotting and drastically reducing graft failure rates. I lived in the lab for 3 years. I worked on a tiny fellowship stipend of $48,000 while misstudent loancetat. $48,000 while misstudent loancetat $220,000. But my family had no idea. In 2019, my brother Rohan bought a second home, a $1.2 million condo in downtown Chicago overlooking Lake Michigan. My cousin Mira told me that our father had paid the down payment as a reward for Rohan stabilizing the Naperville clinic. Your dad is telling everyone that Rohan is the future of Chicago medicine, Mira said over the phone. They don't even mention your name at family dinners, Maya. It's like you vanished. But everyone in town knows Rohan is slipping. Slipping? I asked, my fingers tightening around a beaker of saline solution. He's doing high-volume elective procedures, but he's rushing, Mira whispered. He had a patient last month, a wealthy woman from Hinsdale, who had a severe infection after a routine varicose vein removal. Rohan ignored her calls for 3 days. She ended up in the ICU with sepsis. Your dad had to pay a $400,000 settlement out of court to keep her from suing the clinic. A $400,000 settlement? I asked. And the medical board? Your dad has friends on the state board, Maya. They swept it under the rug. But the staff at the clinic are starting to leave. They're scared of Rohan's license getting pulled. I hung up and sat at my desk in the lab. I opened my laptop and created a digital folder in my secure drive. I titled it, The Records. Inside, I uploaded the scan of my father's disowning letter. Then, I added the public records of the settlement my father had paid for Rohan's malpractice. Next, I added screenshots of the unanswered texts I'd sent my mother, simple messages like, Happy Diwali, Ma. I hope you are healthy, which remained marked as read with no reply. I wasn't keeping these records out of malice. I was keeping them because when you are gaslit by your family for decades, you begin to doubt your own sanity. You need proof that the world you left was actually as toxic as you remember. In my third year of fellowship, I met Neil Chen. Neil was a civil rights attorney who worked for a non-profit in Boston. He was 34, wore rumpled tweed jackets, and had a quiet, steady way of looking at the world that made everything feel grounded. He didn't care about medical dynasties or luxury cars. He cared about systemic justice and the alignment of his bookshelves. When I told him about my family, we were sitting in a small noodle shop in Chinatown, the windows fogged up from the winter steam. Maya, Neil said, covering my hand with his. A family that demands you shrink so they can feel tall is not a family. It's a hostage situation. You didn't fail them. You escaped. We got married in a small civil ceremony at Boston City Hall in 2021. There were only 4 people present: Neil's parents, Auntie Kieran, and Dr. Alice Vance. My parents did not attend. I had sent them an invitation. My mother sent a card with no return address. Inside was a $50 check and a single sentence: "We hope you are happy, Maya. Your father is still very upset." I didn't cash the check. I pinned it to the corkboard in my office next to my first patent approval. That patent number 10,847,392 for the biosynthetic vascular graft, changed everything. A medical device company based in Chicago, Vanguard MedTech, bought the exclusive licensing rights to my patent. They paid me a lump sum of $650,000 and a 3% royalty on all future sales. For the first time in my life, I was out of debt. I paid off my student loans in a single day. Vanguard MedTech also offered me a position as a clinical consultant, which brought me back to Chicago in 2023. I didn't return to the wealthy suburbs where my father lived. Neil and I bought a quiet, historic townhouse in Lincoln Park. In 2024, the St. Jude Medical Group, the largest non-profit hospital network in Illinois, was looking for a new chief medical officer. They wanted someone who had both clinical expertise and a strong research background to run their operations. Dr. Alice Vance, who sat on the National Search Committee, submitted my name. After 5 rounds of interviews, the Board of Trustees voted unanimously. At 32, I became the youngest chief medical officer in the history of the hospital group. My face was featured on the cover of the Chicago Business Journal under the headline, "Dr. Maya Sharma appointed CMO of St. Jude Medical Group." My father and brother still didn't call. But my cousin Mira did. "Maya, Rohan is in deep trouble," she said, his voice shaking. He performed a double bypass surgery at their private clinic last month, which they aren't even fully equipped to do, on a prominent developer's brother. He nicked the internal mammary artery and didn't notice. The patient coded on the table. They managed to revive him, but he has permanent brain damage from oxygen deprivation. My chest tightened. That's malpractice, Mira. A bypass should never be done in a private clinic without a full ICU backup. I know, Mira said. The family is suing for $3.5 million. And this time, your dad can't pay it off. The clinic is broke. They remortgaged the Naperville building last year to buy new cosmetic lasers that aren't making any money. If they don't get a bailout, they are going to lose the buildings, the practice, and Rohan's license. I sat in my massive office at the St. Jude Tower, looking out at the city. What are they going to do? I asked. They're trying to sell the practice, Mira said. They've submitted an acquisition proposal to a major hospital group. They think they can get $4.5 million for the patient database and the buildings. Which hospital group, Mira? St. Jude, she said. I looked down at the pile of folders on my desk. At the very bottom, waiting for my review, was a red folder labeled, Acquisition Proposal, Sharma Medical Associates. I slowly pulled it to the top. The red folder was heavy, sitting on the glass desk under the soft glow of my office lamp. I spent 3 hours that night reading every page of the acquisition proposal for Sharma Medical Associates. As Chief Medical Officer, it was my job to do the clinical due diligence on any potential buyout. If the clinic had high infection rates, unresolved lawsuits, or outdated equipment, St. Jude could not absorb them. It would be a toxic asset. And what I found was far worse than what Mira had told me. Rohan hadn't just made one mistake. He had built a house of cards. Over the last 4 years, the clinic had settled 6 different complaints out of court. 3 of them were for severe surgical site infections, 2 were for vascular grafts that had failed within 90 days because they weren't properly sized, and 1 was for a cosmetic laser procedure that had left a 22-year-old girl with permanent third-degree burns on her neck. The financial statements were a disaster. The clinic owed $1.8 million to medical suppliers. $1.8 million to medical suppliers, $600,000 in back taxes, and had a pending $3.5 million malpractice claim from the family of Arthur Pendleton, the developer's brother who now sat in a long-term care facility, unable to speak or feed himself. My father had remortgaged their Lake Forest mansion for $1.1 million to keep the clinic afloat, but the cash had been burned in months. And then, my personal phone buzzed. It was a Tuesday evening, around 8:30 p.m. I was still at my desk. The screen showed my mother's name. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. I stared at the screen, my hand hovering over the glass. I hadn't heard her voice in 7 years. I picked it up. Maya! Beta! She was crying. It wasn't the soft, polite sniffle she used when she wanted to guilt me into coming home for holidays. It was a raw, terrified sob. Maya, please. I know you are in Chicago. Mira told me. I know you are a big doctor at the hospital group now. I am the chief medical officer, Ma, I said, my voice completely flat, holding back the wave of old pain that tried to rise. They are going to take the house, Maya, she wept. The sheriff came today. Foreclosure notices. Your father, he won't eat. He sits in his study in the dark. He had a panic attack yesterday, he thought he was having a heart attack. Rohan is, his drinking, Maya. He won't go to the clinic. We need the hospital to buy the clinic. If the board rejects the buyout, we will lose everything. We will be homeless. Please, talk to the board. Tell them we are a good family. I closed the red folder. Here was the truth. I could have resolved this in a single day. As CMO, I had the authority to recommend a clinical restructure, which would allow St. Jude to buy the clinic's real estate for a discount, pay off the debts, and absorb the staff. But it would mean saving Rohan from the consequences of his own negligence. It would mean allowing my father to keep his pride intact, to go on believing that he was the great patriarch who had merely hit a run of bad luck. Ma, I said, my voice steady, though my knuckles were white around the phone. The board reviews acquisitions based on clinical data, not family connections. I cannot interfere. Maya, how can you be so cold? She cried. We are your family. Your father was hard on you, yes, but he did it to make you strong. Look at where you are now. You are the head of a hospital. You wouldn't be there without the education we gave you. I am here because of the scholarships and grants I earned, Ma, I said. And because I worked 80 hours a week while you were celebrating Rohan's new cars. I have to go. I hung up. That night, I went home to our Lincoln Park townhouse. Neil had made dinner, a simple pasta with garlic and olive oil. He could tell immediately from my face that something had shifted. I laid the red folder on the kitchen island. They want St. Jude to buy them out for $4.5 million, I said. My mother called me. They are facing foreclosure. Neil set his fork down. He looked at the folder, then at me. What does the data say, Maya? It's a horror show, I said. Rohan is a dangerous surgeon. If we buy that clinic and put our name on the door, we are absorbing his liability. If he kills a patient under the St. Jude banner, it's our responsibility. The clinical recommendation is a flat rejection. I should write the veto report tonight. Neil walked over, placing his hands on my shoulders. But you're hesitating, he said softly. I'm not hesitating about the veto, I said. Rohan should not be practicing medicine. But if I just submit a written veto, the board will reject it, the clinic will go bankrupt, and they will blame the faceless corporation for their downfall. They will never realize what they did. So what do you want to do? I want them to present to the board, I said. I want them to sit in that room and explain their valuation. And I want to be the one who asks the questions. Neil smiled, a quiet, supportive curve of his lips. Then schedule the meeting, Dr. Sharma. Let them see who holds the pen. If this story is hitting home for you, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us reach more people who need to hear that their worth isn't determined by a toxic family. And if you've ever had to face down the people who doubted you, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one of them. Now, let's get to the meeting. The next morning, I walked into my office at 7:30 a.m. My secretary, a sharp 30-year-old named Marcus Vance, was already setting up my calendar. Marcus, I said. The buyout proposal for Sharma Medical Associates. Schedule a formal review with the board of directors for next Thursday at 10 a.m. Marcus looked up, surprised. Normally, clinical rejections are handled via email, Dr. Sharma. Are you sure you want a full board review? Yes, I said. And invite the primary partners of the clinic to present their case. Dr. Ramesh Sharma and Dr. Rohan Sharma. Tell them the Chief Medical Officer wants a live presentation of their clinical outcomes and financial valuations. Understood, Marcus said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. For the next week, I worked in silence. I pulled every medical record, every patient complaint, and every financial audit associated with my father's clinic. I compiled them into a single, comprehensive binder. I also did one more thing. I contacted the attorney representing the family of Arthur Pendleton, the man Rohan had left brain-damaged. I asked for a copy of the clinical deposition. What I read made my stomach turn. During the surgery, when the patient's oxygen levels began to drop, Rohan had insisted on finishing the anastomosis rather than calling for emergency cart assistance. He had delayed the transfer to a hospital by 45 minutes because he was terrified of the publicity. He had risked a man's life to save his own reputation. I printed the deposition, slid it into the back of my binder, and closed the cover. I was ready. Thursday, October 24, 9:55 a.m. The St. Jude boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the climate control system. 7 members of the board of trustees sat in their leather chairs, reviewing their tablets. Dr. Arthur Vance, now the senior clinical advisor, sat to my right. I was wearing a navy blue tailored suit, my chief medical officer ID badge clipped to my lapel. My hair was pulled back neatly. My hands were resting on the heavy, black binder in front of me. At 10 a.m., the doors opened. My secretary, Marcus, ushered my father and brother into the room. Ramesh walked in like he owned the floor. He wore his gold watch, his tailored suit, and a look of practiced, professional warmth. Rohan followed him, carrying a sleek leather folder under his arm. He looked around the room, offering a confident, charming smile to the board members. Then, his eyes landed on the head of the table. His smile froze. His footsteps stuttered. He stopped so suddenly that my father almost bumped into him from behind. Rohan, what are you doing? My father hissed under his breath, before he looked up and saw me. My father's face went through 3 distinct stages of shock. First, confusion, wondering why his estranged daughter was sitting in a hospital boardroom. Second, recognition, realizing who I was. And third, a flash of red-hot anger that he quickly tried to mask with a tight, patronizing smile. Maya, my father said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. What is this? What are you doing here? I did not stand up. I did not smile. I looked at him with the calm, detached gaze of an executive reviewing a vendor. Please sit down, Dr. Ramesh Sharma, Dr. Rohan Sharma, I said, my voice clear and carrying across the table. We are here to review the buyout proposal for Sharma Medical Associates. As the Chief Medical Officer of the St. Jude Medical Group, I will be conducting the clinical audit portion of this presentation. Chief Medical Officer? Rohan whispered. His face had gone pale, a sheen of sweat instantly appearing on his forehead. He looked at the board members, then back at me. You. That's impossible. You were in Boston. You were doing research. I returned to Chicago 2 years ago, Rohan, I said. Now, please, sit down. We have a lot of data to go through. My father sat down, his hands flat on the mahogany table. I could see the muscles in his jaw twitching. He adjusted his collar, trying to regain his composure, trying to reclaim his role as the dominant patriarch. Maya, my father said, his voice dropping into that deep, patronizing tone. I think there has been a misunderstanding. This is a business meeting. If you are working here, that is fine, but we should discuss this privately. You don't have the background to understand the complexity of a private surgical practice. Rohan and I have built. Dr. Sharma, I interrupted him, my voice cutting through his like a laser. This is a formal board review. Please address me as Dr. Maya Sharma, or Chief Medical Officer. And as for my background, I spent 5 years in cardiothoracic residency at Mass General, completed a 3-year knee fellowship, and hold 4 patents in microvascular surgery. I understand clinical operations perfectly. My father's mouth closed. His eyes narrowed, a cold, dangerous glint in them. Let's start with your valuation, I said, opening my black binder. You have valued Sharma Medical Associates at 4.5 million. You claim this is based on your patient database, your 2 surgical suites, and your Naperville facility. I swiped a page in my binder. But according to our audit, your Naperville facility has been closed for 3 months due to staffing shortages. You are currently 2.8 million in debt. You have yet stand ingen voicesta medical suppliesta taling. 2.8 million in debt. You have yet stand ingen voicesta medical suppliesta taling 1.8 million, and you are 60 days past due on your lease payments for your surgical lasers. That is a temporary cash flow issue, Rohan blurted out, his voice cracking slightly. Once we integrate with St. Jude, our patient volume will. Rohan, I said, looking at him directly. Your patient volume is declining because your reputation is compromised. Let's look at your clinical outcomes. I turned the page. The board members followed along on their tablets. In the last 4 years, Sharma Medical Associates has settled 6 separate malpractice claims out of court. All of them involved surgeries performed by you, Rohan. 2 vascular graft failures, 3 severe surgical infections, and 1 cosmetic burn. Every surgeon has complications, Rohan yelled, slamming his folder onto the table. You can't use standard surgical risks to tank our valuation. Our father is a pioneer in this city. Your father retired 3 years ago, Rohan, I said, my voice remaining completely level. He is no longer performing surgeries. You are the sole surgeon at the clinic. And your complications are not standard surgical risks. They are the result of rush jobs and negligence. My father leaned forward, his eyes burning with fury. Maya, that is enough. He boomed, his voice shaking the water glasses on the table. You are using this boardroom to settle a childhood grudge. You are trying to humiliate your brother because you were always jealous of him. This is unprofessional. Dr. Ramesh Sharma, I said, leaning forward slightly, meeting his gaze with a cold, absolute certainty. I am showing you the receipts. If you think this is a grudge, let's talk about Mr. Arthur Pendleton. The room went dead silent. Rohan's chest was heaving. He looked down at the table, his fingers clawing at his leather folder. On September 14th, I read from the binder, Dr. Rohan Sharma performed a double coronary artery bypass graft on Mr. Pendleton at your private clinic. During the procedure, the internal mammary artery was severed. Rather than calling for emergency transportation to a tertiary hospital, Dr. Rohan Sharma spent 45 minutes attempting to repair the vessel himself to avoid the negative publicity of a transfer. I looked at the board members. The patient coded. By the time emergency services were called, the patient had suffered 22 minutes of severe cerebral hypoxia. Mr. Arthur Pendleton is now 39 years old, living in a long-term care facility, unable to recognize his wife or feed his children. His family is suing your clinic for 3.5 million. I looked back at my father. And here is the deposition of your head nurse, Sarah Jenkins. She states under oath that Dr. Rohan Sharma ordered her to falsify the surgical chart, to state that the code happened after the transfer began. She refused, and she resigned the next day. That's a lie. Rohan screamed, his face turning red, sweat dripping down his nose. She's a disgruntled employee. Dad, tell them it's a lie. My father didn't speak. He sat frozen, his face grey, staring at the printout of the nurse's deposition on the table in front of him. For the first time in his life, Dr. Ramesh Sharma looked old. He looked weak. "Rohan," I said, my voice dropping into a quiet, devastating whisper. "You didn't just fail as a surgeon. You failed as a human being. You risked a man's life to save your pride. The same pride our father used to buy your cars and pay off your mistakes." I closed the binder. The sound of the cover landing against the mahogany table was like a gavel striking. "As Chief Medical Officer of the St. Jude Medical Group," I said, looking at the Board of Trustees, "my clinical recommendation is a flat, non-negotiable rejection of the acquisition of Sharma Medical Associates. We cannot and will not absorb a clinic run with this level of negligence. Furthermore, I am forwarding this file, including the nurse's deposition and the clinical reviews, to the Illinois State Medical Licensing Board this afternoon." Rohan fell back into his chair, his head in his hands. He was shaking, a quiet, desperate sob escaping his throat. My father looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, defeat, and a strange, terrifying realization. "Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please. It will ruin us. The licensing board, they will take Rohan's license. We will lose the house. Everything I built. You built a legacy on a lie, Dad," I said. And today, the truth came home. I stood up. I picked up my binder. "This meeting is adjourned," I said. The fallout was swift and absolute. 2 weeks after the board meeting, St. Jude officially issued the written rejection of the buyout. Without the $4.5 million cash injection, Sharma Medical Associates collapsed. The bank foreclosed on the Naperville facility, and the main clinic in Lake Forest was forced into Chapter 7 bankruptcy to cover the outstanding debts to the medical suppliers and the back taxes. My father had to sell the Lake Forest mansion, the brick house with the manicured lawns and the 3-car garage, to pay his portion of the $3.5 million Pendleton settlement. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a modest suburb of Chicago. Rohan's license was suspended indefinitely by the state licensing board pending a full criminal investigation into the cover-up of Arthur Pendleton's code. He would never hold a scalpel again. According to Mira, he spent his days in their small apartment, staring at the walls, his Rolex sold, his Mercedes repossessed. But I had set conditions. I told my mother, through my cousin Mira, that I would pay the rent on their new apartment and cover her medical expenses on one condition. My father had to step down from all medical consulting boards, and Rohan had to seek professional psychiatric help for his substance abuse. I wouldn't write a check to save their pride, but I would write a check to keep them from hitting the concrete. 6 months later, on a rainy Tuesday in April, a letter arrived at my office. It was addressed to Dr. Maya Sharma, Chief Medical Officer. The return address was their suburban apartment. It was my father's handwriting. Neat, structured, written with a black fountain pen on plain white paper. I sat at my desk, looking out at the Chicago River, the water gray and churning under the spring rain. I unfolded the paper. "Dear Maya," it began. "I am writing this because I do not have the courage to say it to your face. And after what happened in the boardroom, I know I have no right to ask for your time. For 30 years, I lived in a world of my own construction. I was a man obsessed with legacy, with the idea that the Sharma name had to be carried by a son who looked like me and acted like me. I saw Rohan's weakness, but instead of correcting it, I hid it. I thought that by protecting him, I was protecting our family. And I saw your strength, Maya. But because you didn't need me, because you were brilliant and independent, I convinced myself that you didn't need my affection either. I called you the family failure because you refused to play the game I had designed. But the truth is, I was the failure. I was so focused on the son who was weak that I abandoned the daughter who was strong. You were never begging for attention, Maya. You were begging to be seen. And I chose to look away. That is the greatest regret of my life. I do not expect you to forgive me. I only write this so you know that I finally see the truth. You are the greatest surgeon this family has ever produced." I read the letter twice. My chest felt tight, a lump rising in my throat that I hadn't felt since I was 22, standing in the Harvard yard alone. But this time, the tightness wasn't pain. It was release. It was the sound of a lock clicking open after a decade in the dark. I folded the letter back into its envelope and walked over to my laptop bag. I opened the zippered pocket, pulled out the stethoscope case, and slid the letter inside, right next to the yellowed paper from my mother. The two letters sat together. The wound, and the witness. That evening, Vanguard MedTech released the first quarterly sales report for my biosynthetic vascular graft. The product was now being used in over 200 hospitals across the country. The royalties credited to my account were $1.2 million. Neil and I sat in our living room in Lincoln Park, a fire crackling in the grate, the room warm and smelling of cedar wood. "What are we going to do with the money, Maya?" Neil asked, leaning his head against mine. "I want to start a foundation," I said. "The Pendleton Foundation. To provide home health care and rehabilitation equipment for families of patients who have suffered severe hypoxic brain injuries. I want to fund it with the vascular graft royalties." Neil wrapped his arm around me, squeezing my shoulder. "That's a beautiful way to close the loop, Dr. Sharma." "It's the only way," I said. Before we went to sleep, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I opened the records folder. I looked at the files. The disowning letter. The court settlements. Rohan's malpractice charts. The newspaper clippings of my appointment as CMO. My cursor hovered over the delete button. I sat there for 5 minutes, the cursor blinking on the screen. I didn't delete it. I closed the laptop. Some wounds don't need to be erased. They don't need to be hidden away as if they never happened. They just need to be witnessed. And mine finally had been. If you've spent your life being told you aren't enough, that you're the failure because you chose a path of truth over a family lie, I want you to know something. Your worth is not written in their validation. It is written in your work, your character, and the life you build when you walk away. If this story meant something to you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to know they aren't invisible. And drop a white heart in the comments if you've ever had to find your own way. I read every single comment. Thank you for listening. Next week, we have another story of family betrayal and justice. My stepmother locked me out of the trust, she didn't know I had the signature cards. Make sure your notifications are on for that one.